2 hours ago, the White House crossed a line no American administration has ever crossed against a NATO ally. President Trump signed an emergency executive directive formally labeling Canada a Chinese intelligence proxy, and using that designation to initiate the freezing of over $800 billion in Canadian sovereign assets held inside American financial institutions. Not tariffs, not trade reviews, a full asset freeze. The kind of action Washington reserves for adversaries. The kind of language used for enemies. And today, for the first time in history, it was aimed at the country sharing the longest peaceful border on Earth. The directive rests on 3 pillars. First, the Treasury Department is authorized to immediately freeze Canadian government-linked assets in American banks, real estate, infrastructure, and technology companies. Canadian pension funds alone hold positions in American toll roads, airports, data centers, and energy pipelines worth hundreds of billions. Every position is now at risk of forced liquidation. Second, Canada's recent trade agreements with China are formally classified as a national security threat. The White House document describes Canada as a primary transshipment corridor for Chinese goods circumventing American tariff structures, effectively accusing Ottawa of serving as Beijing's backdoor into the American economy. Third, the directive triggers a Section 301 investigation with the legal power to impose tariffs of up to 100% on all Canadian imports. Not 25%, not 50%, 100%, on everything. The assumption behind all 3 pillars was identical. Hit Canada hard enough and fast enough, and Carney would buckle. Ottawa would call. The cabinet would fracture. Corporate leaders would flood Parliament Hill demanding surrender. The White House had run this playbook before. They believed it would work again. They were wrong. But before we get into what Carney actually did, if you want coverage like this every time something this significant breaks, hit subscribe and drop a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach people who need to hear it. 45 minutes after the directive became public, Mark Carney appeared at a nationally televised address. He did not hold it at Parliament. He held it at the Bank of Canada headquarters in Ottawa, a deliberate choice that sent its own unmistakable message. Behind him stood the governors of 6 Canadian provinces and the ambassadors of the United Kingdom, Germany, and Japan. No notes. No teleprompter. He opened with one sentence that immediately dominated every financial terminal on the planet. The United States has today chosen to treat its oldest partner as an adversary. We accept their characterization of this moment. We do not accept their terms. Then came 4 countermeasures. Each one had clearly been prepared long before today. First, Canada is activating what Carney called the variable geometry framework, a set of pre-negotiated trade and financial agreements with the European Union, the United Kingdom, China, and the Gulf states, designed specifically to reduce Canadian dependence on American markets. These agreements were drafted and finalized over 14 months in complete secrecy. Canadian exports to non-American markets had already risen 30% in the final quarter of 2025. The infrastructure was in place. Today, the switch was flipped. Second, every American corporate asset operating on Canadian soil is now subject to immediate national security review under the Investment Canada Act emergency provisions. ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Chevron collectively hold tens of billions in Canadian energy assets. As of this moment, those assets require Ottawa's explicit approval to continue operating. Carney took Trump's instrument and pointed it directly back across the border. Third, Canada is filing simultaneous legal actions at the WTO and the International Court of Justice challenging the asset freeze as a violation of sovereign investment protections. Japan, South Korea, Germany, France, Australia, and Norway have all indicated they will file supporting briefs. These are not symbolic gestures. These are countries with trillions in American markets who just watched Washington threaten to seize Allied sovereign wealth over a political accusation. Their participation is self-preservation. Fourth, and this is the move that reportedly triggered an emergency NSC meeting within the hour, Carney announced the formal expansion of Canada's alternative financial settlement network. This system clears transactions through London, Frankfurt, Tokyo, and Sydney without involving any American financial institution. Australia and Japan are now full members. South Korea is in final negotiations. India has signed a memorandum of understanding. The combined GDP of economies in this framework now exceeds $50 trillion. Every transaction routed outside the American system weakens dollar centrality. And it is growing every single day. Now here is why the economic reality makes Washington's position far weaker than it appears. The $800 billion freeze threat sounds powerful. It is not. Forcing liquidation of Canadian positions doesn't punish Canada. It floods American markets with sell orders and crashes the very asset prices those funds were holding. Senior economists at 3 major Wall Street institutions said privately that executing the freeze would destabilize American bond markets and trigger a credit event with no clear exit. The energy picture is equally devastating. Canada supplies approximately 60% of all American crude oil imports. The refineries in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and along the Gulf Coast are engineered specifically for heavy Canadian crude. Switching to domestic light crude or Saudi supply takes 18 to 24 months and billions per facility. If Canada accelerates redirection of crude toward Asian and European buyers, and the pipeline infrastructure to do exactly that was quietly upgraded over the past year, American gasoline prices in the Midwest could spike by over $1 per gallon within weeks. That is not a Canada problem. That is a midterm election problem. The American business community did not wait. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce called the directive the most reckless unilateral economic action taken against an allied nation since the Second World War. The American Petroleum Institute demanded immediate reversal. Executives from Marathon Petroleum, Valero, and Phillips 66 made direct calls to the White House warning that refinery operations could not continue under these conditions. The governor of Michigan went on live television stating 40,000 jobs in her state were at direct risk. These are not Canadian voices. These are American voices telling the American president he just aimed a weapon at his own economy. Internationally, the damage was immediate. The European Union issued a formal statement calling the China proxy designation a fabrication designed to justify economic aggression. The British Prime Minister called Carney before American markets closed. Japan accelerated its review of trade dependencies on the United States. 6 Republican senators from border states requested emergency briefings. Markets confirmed everything. The U.S. dollar fell to its lowest level against allied currencies in 3 years. American bank stocks dropped on legal exposure from the freeze provisions. Treasury bond auctions saw significant pullback from foreign sovereign buyers in Japan, South Korea, and Germany, countries with direct and urgent reason to question the safety of holding American assets. When allied nations slow their purchase of American debt, borrowing costs rise. And when they rise across the board, no executive order reverses the damage. A leaked internal note from a major Wall Street institution put it plainly. The administration confused financial dominance with financial invincibility. They are not the same. Dominance requires trust. And trust, once broken at this scale, does not return on demand. Trump now faces 3 paths, and none lead where he intended. Enforce the directive fully, and watch gasoline prices climb. Allied nations accelerate their departure from dollar systems, and the alternative financial network expand with every passing week. Quietly walk it back, and hand Carney the most complete diplomatic victory any Canadian leader has achieved in living memory. Escalate further, and push the entire Western alliance into a structural realignment that American power will spend a decade trying to reverse. Every option costs more than the last. None produce submission. At the center of all of this stands a man the Trump administration fundamentally misread. Mark Carney governed the Bank of Canada through 2008. He governed the Bank of England through Brexit. He understands where the pressure points are, how sovereign capital flows, and precisely what happens when institutional trust erodes at scale. The White House sent a political threat. They received a response from a central banker who has spent his career watching systems break and making sure his country was never the one left exposed when they did. 2 hours ago, Washington believed it was delivering a knockout blow. 2 hours later, the dollar is falling, allied nations are filing legal briefs, a parallel financial system is expanding, and Carney is standing at cameras, having executed what may be the most thoroughly prepared diplomatic counter in the history of this relationship. Trump wanted to humiliate Canada. He handed it a platform. He wanted to demonstrate American financial power. He demonstrated its limits. He wanted Carney to call and beg for terms. Carney did not even check his phone.